Okay, welcome to Philosophy 2306 Ethics. This is our Zoom class session for Thursday, August 28th. We'll be in Module 1, and the topic of Module 1, the title to the module is Critical Thinking and Moral Decision Making. Now, that's going to always be the first slide that you see. And then after I do the welcome, the first thing I'm going to do every class, the second slide, is remind you of important due dates. So I will keep you reminded all semester long of what's coming due. Now we'll see there is an important due dates box in the syllabus. There's also that same important due date box on Blackboard, and then it's also in the assignments folder on Blackboard. So the due dates are all over the place, and I'll keep you reminded. So there will be no reason why you should be unaware that something is due. Now, there might be a reason why you can't get it turned in on time, and we can discuss that. That's not a problem. As you'll see when we get into the syllabus, that with the exception of, well, the only exception to my leniency on due dates is the discussion board, which I'm a stickler on because of the way they're graded, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. So if you have a problem come up and need a little extra time, you just need to communicate that with me. I'm flexible there. But I'm just saying there won't be any reason why that the assignment due date catches you unaware, because I'll always remind you of it, right? And also that will give you the opportunity, if you know something's coming up, like maybe you have the company you work for is going to send you on a trip, send you to some training or send you to a seminar or whatever, whatever comes up, and then you can just tell me on such and such a date I'm not going to be there, and I'll turn the assignment in when I get back or whatever. Okay. Now, here are two assignments that are coming due, the first two that are coming due, and let's not worry about them right now. We'll talk much more about them. So, again, this will always be the second slide, and this is the opportunity for me to discuss more about the assignment as it comes closer to the due date, and also a time for you to ask questions. Okay, so this argument analysis worksheet is due Friday, September 12th by 11:59 p.m. So just at the end of the day, Friday, September 12th. We'll talk more about this assignment. You really won't understand it until we go through the lecture. I have a lecture on philosophical argumentation, so you'll know what it is and how to evaluate and analyze arguments. So we'll have some tutorials that we'll do in class together. So if you've gone on Blackboard and looked at that assignment and it was confusing to you, that's understandable, because most of you haven't done this before. This is not something you do in secondary education, but we'll walk through it very carefully, and you'll understand how to do it by the time it's due. Okay, and then again, as we get closer, I'll remind you and I'll discuss it further. And if you have any questions, you can ask. And then reading quiz one, we'll do that on Thursday, October 2nd. All the reading quizzes we'll do here in class, and we'll do them at 6:05. So the reading quizzes are all multiple choice. For each reading quiz, you'll have two readings from the textbook. The quiz material will always come from the textbook. So we'll have 5 questions per reading. So you see here reading quiz one covers the following readings from the textbook: Subjectivism by Julia Driver and The Challenge of Cultural Relativism by James Rachels. And what I will do on October 2nd, I will open up the class just like we're doing tonight. And then at 6:04-ish or so, I'll give you a little bit of time to get over to Blackboard. But what I'll do basically is I'll open up class. I'll make any announcement that I need to make and see if you have any questions on anything. And then I'll pause the class. You'll go over to Blackboard to the reading quizzes folder in the module that we're working on, and we'll go over Blackboard this evening. And at 6:05, that reading quiz will be available to you, and you'll have 15 minutes to complete it. So what we'll do is you'll activate your video so that your cameras are on. You'll situate them so that I can see you. And when 6:05 rolls around, that reading quiz will be available, and you'll take it. have 15 minutes unless you have accommodations. You'll have, if you have accommodations, of course, you'll get extra time if that's on the accommodation. Otherwise, you'll have 15 minutes. And then at 6:20, it'll automatically save and submit after those 15 minutes, and then we'll uh, take up lecture for the evening. Okay. Now, notice in here where I say the quiz will cover the following readings from the textbook Subjectivism by Julia Driver and The Challenge of Cultural Relativism by James Rachels, and I don't give you page numbers. That's because sometimes a student might find the fifth edition, so that we're on the sixth edition of that textbook. Some students may find the fifth edition, have access to that, get it a little cheaper or whatever, and we can make use of that. I have been told that there is a digital copy out there online for free. You might want to look into that. But what I found out is that the digital copy and the hard copy, the page numbering is different. And of course, the page numbering is going to be different from the fifth edition to the sixth edition. So rather than put page numbers and confuse everybody, I just put the author and the title of the reading. Okay. All right. So again, second slide of every class session is going to just be this reminder of what is coming due. And we won't always spend much time on it. If there are no questions and we've already discussed the assignment in a prior class, then I'm just going to remind you and we'll move on. But if there are questions, this is an opportunity for you to ask if you don't understand how to do an assignment, and I can give you a little more instruction.
Professor,
Yep, go ahead.
so I have a question. Where can we find the book, the textbook?
Okay, so, well, you're free to get the textbook from wherever you like and in whatever format you like. You can, if you want to rent it, if you want to purchase it, or if you want to find a digital copy online. Now, here's what I will say. In every class that I have taught over the last couple of years, students have found a digital copy of the textbook online, and they've shared that link in the chat with other students. Now, I can't endorse that for obvious reasons, but I'm telling you that's happened in the past. It's happened earlier this week in my Monday, Wednesday classes. So, if somebody out there wants to find it and then post it in the chat, well, that's up to you to do. I'm just
And okay, and what's the name of the textbook?
Exploring Ethics, an introductory anthology. Now, what's required for the class is the sixth edition, but if you have access to the fifth edition, we can make that work. And it's the fifth edition that I think might be available online for free. There's a digital copy out there, but there may also be a copy of the sixth edition. But if you can get the fifth edition, that will be fine.
Oh, okay. And oh, another question. How many questions can we find? Are we gonna see on the quizzes?
10. So for each quiz, there will be two readings from the textbook. The readings are typically short, like 2 or 3 pages. And so for each quiz, I'll assign two readings, and there will be 5 questions per reading. So a total of 10 questions. And it's multiple choice.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions before we move off of this slide? Okay, now, so this will always be the second slide. The next slide will always be this one. This third slide will always tell you what we're doing for the day. So here's what we're going to do for today. We're going to give a general introduction to the class. We're going to go over the syllabus, and then we're going to go over to Blackboard and just sort of look around Blackboard, and I'll explain where to find things and how to navigate Blackboard. We'll take a break, and then we'll come back and we'll begin Module 1, and I'll give Lecture 1, Morality and Moral Philosophy. Okay? So, again, on a typical Thursday, when I log on, I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint slide. When 6 o'clock hits, I'm going to hit record, unmute my mic, and welcome everybody. We'll begin class. Second slide, going to remind you what's coming due. If you have any questions on how to do the assignment, that would be the time to ask. And also any other questions that you might have. Soon as I've made any announcements that I have to make and we've discussed what's coming due and answered any questions that you might have, then we'll get into this slide here, discussion for the day, and then we'll move right into lecture 1. Okay. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop sharing this PowerPoint slide because I want to pull up the syllabus and go over the syllabus. So I sent out an email and attached that syllabus to the email, but it's also available to you and will be all semester long on Blackboard in the Welcome and Getting Started folder, which is the very first folder on Blackboard. And I'll show you where that's at. So hopefully you have had a chance to look over the syllabus and just kind of familiarize yourself with it. But we're going to go through it now. I'm not going to go into in minute detail, but we are going to walk through it and just so that we know how to use it. That is going to kind of be our roadmap for the semester. All right, let me see if I can find it here real quick. Here we go. Okay. Also, while I'm thinking about it, because I just checked to make sure I was recording, if ever I like just start the class without hitting record, somebody just please stop me and let me know that to hit record. Or sometimes, typically, what happens it's when we come off of break. I don't teach these 1 day a week courses very often. A couple times a year, maybe like one, maybe not even that. I think maybe once a year. Um, so I have a tendency when we come back from break I'll pause the recording when we go on break, and then I'll forget to unpause it. And sometimes students will interrupt and say, "Hey, hit record." So please do that. If you see that I have not uh, started the recording, if I forgot to record at the beginning or if I forget to unpause it and record after the break, please remind me so that we can get the recording down for students who missed the class. All right, so what's showing on your screen now should be the syllabus. And at the top of the syllabus, you have my name and my contact email, and then the class information. And then under that, contact information and office hours. So I ask you to contact me using my email address, krush, K-R-U-S-H, at austincc.edu. That's the best way to get a hold of me. I don't even have a phone number on here, even though I have an ACC phone. I never call in and check it. I've been teaching at ACC. This is my 18th year. I haven't checked it probably in 17 years. So, and the reason is I have my phone set up so that if you email me, it comes straight through, just like a text, right? I have I have the notification sound set so that when I hear that, I know it's an email from the college. And when it's a regular semester, that tells me that it's most likely the case that a student is trying to get a hold of me. So I check it just like I would a text. Okay. Now, that only works for whatever reason if you email me straight from that ACC email address, as opposed to going through Blackboard. You can log on to Blackboard and email other students and email me through Blackboard, but for whatever reason, I can't sync Blackboard with my phone. It will not come through like a regular email. And I don't get it until I log on to Blackboard. And then when I log on to Blackboard, it'll show me that I have a message. And I'm not on Blackboard all the time. Once I finish class, or unless I'm grading or something like that, then I don't have Blackboard. And I don't have, it's difficult for me to access Blackboard through my phone, right? I'm an old man, so the little screen is hard for me to work with. So if you just email me direct, I'll get it immediately. And if it's something I need to respond to, I'm very good at responding to emails. if it's something I need to respond to. Sometimes students want to email me and let me know that you're not going to be in class, you're going to miss the class for a particular on a particular evening, and you want to email me and let me know. You don't have to do that. You can, that's fine, and I appreciate it. Sometimes when you do that, I'll email back, got it, thank you. It depends on how busy I am. If not, if I'm very busy, I may not email you back. I'll just take note of it. But obviously, if you have a question, if it's obvious that it's an email that needs a response, you have a problem or have a question about something, then I'm pretty good about getting back pretty quickly. So if if you email me, if you email me, say 9 o'clock in the morning, and by early evening, 5, 6 o'clock, you haven't heard back, then email me again. Either it didn't go through or I somehow missed it or whatever. That doesn't happen very often, but it could. Okay. So email, that's how you'll contact me. My office hours are Monday through Thursday, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Now, that may not work for you. Don't worry about that. If we need to meet, then we can set a time because my office hours I'm just going to use Zoom. So what will happen is if you need to meet with me, you'll email me. And when you email me, do a couple of things. When you email me for any reason whatsoever, just tell me what class you're in. So when you email me, just say that I'm in your Thursday evening 6 to 8:50 class. And that way I know if I have to go to Blackboard or something like that, I know exactly which one to go to. And then if you need to meet with me, just say, I'm in your Thursday evening class. I need to meet with you, and then give me a couple of times that are good for you to meet, and I'll choose the one that's available to me also, and then I'll set up a Zoom session and I'll email you the link. Say, okay, we'll meet at this time, and you'll use that link. Okay. The reason I do it that way is there is a function on Blackboard where I can just have open office hours and you can just pop in and pop out. The problem is um, sometimes a student is in the office talking to me about something that is confidential, and then another student pops in and I have to ask you to to log out and log back in later, or I have to put you in the waiting room. Either is not good, right? But one, it kind of disrupts the flow of the conversation that I'm having with the other student, and then it's not like if we're meeting in person and you come to my office and you see somebody sitting in there, then you sit in the chair outside until you see that person leave. But if I ask you to log out and give us a few minutes, well, you don't know when to log back in because you don't know when that person's done. And if I put you in the waiting room, well, you're just sitting there with no idea how long it's going to take for me to finish up with the other student. So when you email me to set up a time, I'll typically set up like 10-minute slots, unless you tell me, that that it's going to take a little bit more. I may ask you when you email me if you don't tell me what it's about. Um, I might ask you for that information just to know how much time to allocate. Okay, so the more information that you give me in the email, the better. So you can just say, I'm in your Thursday evening class. I need to meet with you and talk about my grades, or I need to meet with you. I need help on a certain assignment. That'll kind of give me an idea about how much time to allot. Okay. All right. Let's move into this other stuff you can read. That's all stuff that's typical on all of your syllabi. Course rationale. One of the most distinctive things about human beings is that we are not simply determined by natural forces. Well, we're going to assume that's the case, right? That's debatable. If this was my intro course, I would have a whole module on free will and determinism. Some people argue that all of our choices are determined by prior events, right? By uh, external circumstances. So there is a sense in which it's true, right? We are determined to a large extent, genetically, right? So biologically. So there are these determining factors, and it is true that past events shape current situations. But for our sake here, we're going to assume that even if determining factors, the environmental, social, psychological, biological, genetics, whatever, uh, though it is true that there are these determining factors, we're going to operate on the assumption that while they may limit the choices available to us, nevertheless, we do have choices, right? We do choose what to do. So, some prior event may put me in a situation where I have to act, but it seems to me that I have a choice. Even someone might say, well, but you really don't. So let's say, you walk out of Walmart and three guys come up and start trying to rob you of your wallet. You didn't have any choice in that matter, right? That situation was imposed upon you. And so, but I would say, okay, well, you have um, a choice how to act in that particular situation. But some might say, well, not really, because your response to that is going to be genetic, right? I mean, it's going to be determined by prior predispositions, right? Maybe you're a hothead, right? You had nothing to do with that. It's biological. Anyway, you get my point here, right? But I'm going to make the argument that, well, even though there are some determining factors, and certainly there are, um, what they do is they limit the choices available to us, but we still choose from amongst those choices, right? Okay, so we're going to operate on the assumption that we're not simply determined by natural forces. And the key here is not simply, right? We're complex beings and we do make choices. So since we do have the ability to choose, we are volitional beings, we have the capacity to decide how to act. Well, along with that comes one of humanity's greatest challenges, right? And that is to act responsibly, right? To decide how to act. Um, and we have a responsibility to do so rightly. Why is that? Well, because our actions have consequences, and those consequences affect not only ourselves, but others. Right? So our actions have consequences, though the effects of those consequences are going to ripple out and impact others. And I think we have a responsibility to ensure that we act in a way that mitigates, to the extent possible, any harm to others. One of the things that requires ethics at all is the fact that we are social beings, right? We are always already involved in a network of social relationships, and it is from within those relationships that this responsibility arises. So through the study of ethics, we can gain greater insight into how to meet this responsibility successfully. I mean, we're going to get into this later this evening, but if you think about it, right? I mean, we do ethics all the time. If by that we mean we make decisions about what would be right and what would be wrong in any given situation, what is good and what is bad, what is right and what is wrong, we do that all the time. With regard to ourselves, sometimes we ask, well, what would be the right action for me to take in this particular situation? What would be the right thing to do for me given this set of circumstances? But we also do it with others, right? We might say, well, Carl was wrong to do what he did, or Jill was right. She's justified in what she did, and you're going to have reasons for that. So we make these sorts of decisions all the time. It's the type of world we live in, right? So we make these sorts of decisions, and some of them are some of them are rather minor and not so significant, but others bear great significance. And so we'll talk about that as we get into lecture one, especially this evening, but all semester long. So some departmental course learning outcomes. The department wants us, upon successful completion of this course, to be able to read, analyze, and critique philosophical texts. So we will start the semester with a module on critical thinking and critical reading. That is, we want to learn how to think critically and how to read critically. And critical reading is different. It's a different type of reading, and we'll talk much more about that. We want to be able to define and appropriately appropriately use important terms such as relativism, virtue, duty, rights, utilitarianism, natural law, egoism, altruism, autonomy, care, ethics. Well, we want to know what these things are. We want to know what these words mean, what these terms mean, and be able to understand them in context when we read about them. We also want to be able to demonstrate knowledge of major arguments and problems in ethics. So also in Module 1, it's not only about critical thinking, but it's critical thinking and philosophical argumentation. So we want to know what an argument is, and we want to know how to determine the parts of an argument so that we can evaluate and analyze those arguments. Um, We want to be able also to present a well-reasoned argument of our own, both orally and in writing. So here in this class, we're going to have a position paper we'll talk about in a moment, in which you will have an opportunity to take a position on an issue and argue for your position, defend your position in an argument in written form. That will be the paper. And then we have a short presentation in this class in which you will do the same thing, take a position on the issue that I assign you, and offer an oral argument in defense or in support of the position that you take. Okay, and then we want to be able to apply these concepts and principles to issues of moral concern. We want to be able to apply what we learn in this class to various aspects of life and discuss ways of living responsibly in a world where people have diverse ethical beliefs. And then again, in written and oral form, you're going to learn to defend a moral argument. In general terms, the college is looking for us to improve our communication skills, develop, interpret, and express ideas and information through written, oral, and visual communication, and adapt those to purpose, structure, audience, and medium. We'll work on that in here. Critical thinking skills: gather, analyze, synthesize, evaluate, and apply information for the purpose of innovation, inquiry, and creative thinking. We're going to begin. Module 1 will be about critical thinking. And then, of course, personal and social responsibility. We want to learn how these things help us carry out and accomplish our responsibilities both personally and socially. Okay, here is the required text for the class: Stephen M. Kahn, Exploring Ethics, an Introductory Anthology, 6th edition. You can get that in whatever format you like. You can, if you want a hard copy of it, you can get it from the college bookstore or order it from any source that you like. If you want to rent it, you can do that. If you want to rent a digital copy, you're free to do that. If you can find a copy online for free, well, that would be good, right? You're free to do that as well. And then in addition to the readings from the textbook, I also have some additional reading for you to do, and that will be found in the additional reading folder within each module folder on Blackboard. And that could be a link to a website, it could be a Word document or a PDF file. So we'll see in just a moment when we get to the course calendar. The assigned reading is designated by textbook and additional reading. So, of course, if it's designated textbook, you'll find that reading in the textbook. If it's designated additional reading, that will be found in the additional reading folder on Blackboard. So with the exception of the textbook, everything else will be made available to you on our Blackboard site. Okay, instructional methodology. Well, we're going to meet every Thursday night, just like we're doing tonight, and the course will be a mixture of lecture and class discussion. Now, I understand that philosophy classes, and ethics is a philosophy class, it's a subdiscipline within philosophy, they can be lecture heavy. And the reason that they're lecture heavy is because most students, 95% of the students, aren't going to have any exposure to philosophy prior to taking a college course, because we don't do philosophy in secondary education. So when you take an English course, a math course, a history course, whatever, um, you've typically had some exposure to that in secondary education because we teach English, math, history, those sorts of things in secondary education, but not philosophy and not critical thinking for the most part. Some high schools will add critical thinking, but most don't. And so it's sort of new material for you. So we have to spend some time explaining the material. So we're going to have lecture. We'll have some discussion in here. It'll all be done on Zoom as we're doing now. As far as the lecture session goes, again, if you have a question, feel free to unmute your mic and ask. When I ask a question, please feel free to jump in and answer. I know that's difficult for some, and some students are a little shy and hesitant. But this, I'm laid back. And the thing is, when I ask a question, rarely is it the case that I'm looking for a right answer. I'm looking to engage in discussion. There may be a right answer, but most often we're just kind of trying to think through to the best answer, given what the information we have available to you. So I don't believe that every answer is as good as any other answer, or that every answer is right because I believe it or whatever. I mean, there are right and wrong answers, but most of the time we're just looking for better or worse answers. And in this class, most of the time we're just thinking through the issue together, just kind of learning how to think critically as we enter into discussion about issues. So I hope you will feel free to engage in discussion. The other thing is some of the material that we'll cover. This is an ethics class, right? And ethical issues are always complex. They're always very sticky, right? And they're controversial. That's why they're an ethical issue in the first place. They're controversial. So we'll have different opinions on these topics: euthanasia, abortion, immigration, prostitution, pornography, whatever the topic is that we happen to be discussing. We'll have different opinions about it. And you know what? That's okay. I mean, it's okay to have a different opinion, and it's okay to have your opinion challenged by others. So here's the thing. We kind of came through a period in which we toyed with this idea of canceling opinions that we don't like. The problem with that is that's very dangerous. Why is it? Well, for one reason, because power structures change. And I may be all in favor of canceling someone today because I don't like their opinion. And maybe I have the power on my side at the moment and am able to shut that person down and silence them. Well, a perfect example is a change in administration, as we've just seen in this last election. So power structures change, and if I promote canceling others because I don't like their opinion, sooner or later that tide is going to turn, and it's going to be me that is being canceled. A better way to do this is learn how to civically engage in discussion about issues. Now, I understand very clearly that from the top down in our country, what we get is is a poor example of how civic life ought to be carried out. We see demonization, we pointing fingers, mudslinging, calling names. Unfortunately, that's very juvenile and childish. What we need to get back to is civil discourse, where we understand that we have different opinions about things, but we can discuss those civilly. And that's what we'll do in this class. Everyone has a voice in this class. Here's what John Stuart Mill said. John Stuart Mill says, when you silence the opinion of someone else, you run the risk of two things. You run the risk of the opportunity of exchanging error for truth. Maybe I'm wrong, but I won't know that if I won't listen to anybody. If I won't allow anybody to voice an opinion other than the one I hold, well, if I'm wrong, I'll never know that because I won't listen to anyone. But let's say I'm not wrong. Well, if I'm not wrong, at least I'm forced to respond to that opposing opinion. And in doing so, I will know exactly why I hold the opinion that I hold. You see, sometimes we hold opinions that we don't even know the reasons for. we were just kind of raised that way, or it's kind of the prevailing opinion. It's what all my peers hold. And so others have convinced us of something, but we don't really know the reasons. And what happens over time, John Stuart Mill argues, is that when you silence the opposing opinion, pretty soon you devolve into blind dogma. You're willing to do horrible things in defense of your opinion because you're convinced it's the right one, but you no longer know why you hold that opinion. You just hold it blindly and dogmatically. You're willing to bleed and die for it without even understanding the reasons for it. So if I listen to others, at least I have the opportunity of exchanging my error for truth if I'm wrong. But if I'm not wrong, at least listening to them and responding to them will keep me ever mindful of the reasons that I am convinced that my position is the better one. So again, the topics that we discuss in here, we're all going to have differing opinions on it, different positions that we take on it. But what I'm concerned about is not what position you take on an issue, but how well you can defend it, right? In other words, how well you can reason through to your position and support that position with good logical reasoning and evidence. Okay. Well, now let's get to what you're really interested in, what we're going to have to do to get a grade in this class. All right, so we're going to have an argument analysis worksheet. We're going to have 2 discussion boards. We're going to have 4 reading quizzes, a position paper, a class presentation, and a midterm and final exam. The argument analysis worksheet is I give you a series of arguments, and you're going to define the parts of the argument. Now, that may not make any sense to you right now, but we're going to have a couple of lectures on it, and I'll show you what that means. But an argument is really just a piece of reasoning in support of some claim that you're making. So if I say you should not smoke because smoking is hazardous to your health, that's an argument. A philosophical argument is just a piece of reasoning. Now, I've concluded that you should not smoke, and the reason I've concluded that you should not smoke is because it's hazardous to your health. So being able to respond to somebody, especially in an academic setting, is to understand the argument they're making and then be able to analyze and evaluate that argument, right? Is it a good argument? Is the argument supported by sound reasoning, by solid logic, and so on? Okay, so we'll talk much more about that. That's a simple assignment, I think, and you won't have too much trouble with it once you understand what we're doing there. We're going to have 2 discussion boards. Now, these discussion boards, you'll look at the important due date box on the syllabus or on Blackboard, and there you'll see the due date is a Friday at 11:59 p.m. But this discussion board is set up to kind of be a week-long discussion, and we'll talk much more about this before it's due. But it's a week-long discussion, and so what you're going to do when you log on, and I'll show you when we go over to Blackboard. When you log on to Blackboard and open up the module in which the discussion board will be due, and look at and then open up the assignments folder, you're going to see the link to discussion board. And what you'll know when you open up that link, what you'll see when you open up that link is I have 3 instructions. The first is to download and read an article. So there's an article for you to read. And the purpose there is for you to engage that article critically, to do critical reading, which we'll talk about in here. Read that article critically. What is the author saying in this article? What argument is the author making, and how is the author making it? What are the main points? What is important in this text? The second instruction is a list of things from the article that I say to consider. I ask you to consider. I'm just asking you to consider these things, right? As you think through this article, consider these things. So what I'm doing is kind of picking out some of the important things and just say, here are things you need to consider. And then the third instruction are just some questions that I ask you to think about And then what you're going to do is you're going to open up the discussion board, and you'll see that I've already made the first post. So you can read my post. And then when you're ready to engage in the discussion, then just hit reply. Now you can reply to me, you can reply to another student, or you can just reply to the article itself. But the key here is to make a, a contribution that adds substantially to the conversation. In other words, you want to add to the conversation. So don't just sort of repeat in your own words what others have said. And don't just click on reply to somebody and then say, Joe, I agree with you, and then basically say the same thing Joe said in just different terms. Think about the issues being raised, think about what others are saying, and engage critically in the conversation. There's also a grading rubric there for you that I would ask you to read prior to making your post so that you know exactly what I'm looking for in the grading. You're to make 2 posts per each discussion board. So for every, there's only 2, but for the 2 discussion boards, each one you need to make 2 posts. One early in the week, one like Monday or Tuesday of the week that it's due, and then one later in the week, like Thursday or Friday. Here's a good kind of mental picture of that I would be helpful. Think about it this way. Think of you were in the boardroom at work, right? And we're all sitting around a long table, and the boss is at the head of the table, and we are brainstorming, right? We're talking, discussing an issue, and the boss is looking for our input. We're looking for the best answer or the best solution available to us. We want to know what's important, what needs to be considered, and the boss is just going around the table. Now, when it comes to you, you're going to want to let the boss know that you have read up on this issue, you have educated yourself on it, and you're taking it seriously, and you want to make a contribution to the conversation. What you don't want to do is just say what others have said, because then the boss is like, well, you've not said anything but what everyone else has already said, right? So you're going to want to make a substantial contribution, and then it's going to go on around the table, and other things are going to be brought up, and other things are going to be said, and then eventually it'll come back to you, and then you're going to want to say something based on all the information that has been presented since you spoke last. Okay, so think of it that way. So when you get on Monday or Tuesday, read everyone who's posted before you, jump in, engage that conversation, and then let it go for a couple days. And then maybe Thursday, Friday, jump back on, see what's been said since you posted last, and then again, get in the conversation. Okay, so read these instructions here in the syllabus very carefully, and then read the grading rubric very carefully, and we'll discuss this more as we get closer to the discussion board being due. Okay, and then you can ask any questions that you have. Remember that second slide is always going to be due dates. When I remind you of that, I'll discuss it when we get closer, and then you can ask any questions that you might have. All right, but again, the key here is to critically engage that text and critically engage your peers in the discussion. All right. We also have a position paper due. This is a 3 to 3.5 page paper, 750 to 850 words. It's a position paper. What is a position paper? That means you're taking a position on a topic. Now, the topic assigned for this paper is free speech and censorship. Everybody writes on the same topic. So when you have all this information available to you already in the assignments folder, this will probably be in Module 4 assignment folder, because this will be due when this is due will be in Module 4. So you can already look at the instructions, look at the topic. So basically, there is an article for you to read, the First Amendment Encyclopedia on Censorship, and you'll need to do a little further research, maybe read some other stuff on free speech and censorship, determine where you stand on it. A position paper, again, you're taking a position. What does that mean? Well, let me use as an example something I think that we can all understand. Let's say the topic was abortion. You were taking the position on abortion. Well, maybe your position is, after you've researched abortion, maybe your position is that you're absolutely against it. Your position is that abortion is morally wrong. Okay, that's your position. Now develop an argument to support that. Or maybe after researching it, you think, no, there's nothing wrong with abortion. It's the woman's right to choose. She's sovereign over her body. Okay, now you're going to have reasons for thinking that. Now put those reasons together into an argument supporting your position, which is it's the woman's right to choose. Or maybe you fall somewhere in between. Maybe you think that in general abortion is wrong, but there are exceptions like health of the mother, rape, incest. Okay, then make an argument defending that position. That's what a position paper is. So in this case, free speech, maybe you're opposed to free speech, censorship. Hopefully you're not opposed to free speech. Maybe you're opposed to any form of censorship. Maybe you think that it's never okay for government or institutions to censor the free speech of the citizen. Okay, that's your position. Make an argument for it. Or maybe you think, well, there are times when free speech, when censorship might be justified, when the government might be justified in censoring speech. Okay, determine when those times are, under what instances or cases would the government be justified in censoring free speech. Now we're going to have a whole lecture on this, and we're going to have a whole lecture on how to write this position paper. You'll see in the syllabus. There's a whole lecture on how to write this position paper, what I'm expecting, how to go about it. And then we're going to have two lectures at the beginning of Module 4, Liberty, Power, and Propaganda, and Free Speech and Censorship, in which we talk about this very issue. So you'll have plenty of exposure to it when it comes time to write that paper. All right, reading quizzes. We talked about how we're going to do that already, but I'll just show you that here under reading quizzes, I give you for all four reading quizzes well ahead of time the readings from the textbook you'll be quizzed on. So reading quiz 1, Subjectivism by Julia Driver, The Challenge of Cultural Relativism by James Rachels. Reading quiz 2, The Social Contract by Thomas Hobbes and a Theory of Justice by John Rawls. So in other words, there's no reason why you can't get a good head start on reading these and thinking carefully about these readings. Don't wait until 5 o'clock on the day we're going to have the quiz, because philosophical texts are very dense. They're not easy texts to read and comprehend. And the reading quiz is an opportunity for you to practice critical reading, and it is intended to gauge how well you comprehend the text. These reading quizzes are going to be administered prior to my discussing in lecture the material. So it's like if we were meeting in person, and at the end of class, I said, okay, read Julia, for next class, read Julia Driver's Subjectivism, and at the beginning of class, we'll have a quiz on it. And so you go home and you read Julia Driver's Subjectivism, and when you come to class next time, then the first thing I'm going to do is pass out the quiz and give you the quiz, and then after that, we'll discuss the text. Now, sometimes students get frustrated with this, and it's every semester I have somebody say, why are we having the quiz prior to you discussing it in lecture? Because the whole point of this is to learn how to read critically, not to give back to me what I've said to you, but to learn how to read the text critically and understand for yourself what the author is doing, not have me tell you what the author is doing, right? So this is an exercise in critical reading. Okay. So that's how, and again, these will be available at 6:05 in the reading quizzes folder within the modules folder on the date specified in the syllabus or in the important due dates box. So at 6:05, you'll go over to Blackboard, open up the reading quiz folder, and take the reading quiz. You'll have 10 multiple choice questions, 5 per each reading, and you'll have 15 minutes to complete it. Okay, class presentation. Now, don't panic over this class presentation. I know I've sat where you sat. I didn't like to do presentations either, but this is not a speech class, so this is not really all that formal. What I'm going to do, if you've taken a look at the textbook, you will know this, and if you haven't gotten the textbook yet, you'll see when you get it. The textbook, the last section of the textbook is titled Moral Problems. So if you look at the textbook, the first part is challenges to morality. The second part is moral theories, and then the last part is contemporary moral problems. Now, in the last section of the textbook, contemporary moral problems, you have issues like immigration, racism, abortion, euthanasia, environment, ethical treatment of animals, and that sort of thing. What I'm going to do, I'm going to teach our module 1, which is not in the textbook. It's critical thinking, and the critical thinking is not in the textbook, so you'll have a lot of additional reading there up front. I'm going to teach module 1 on critical thinking and philosophical argumentation. I'm going to teach module 2 on challenges to morality, and I'm going to teach module 3, which is moral theories. And then when it comes to that last, so I'm going to teach the first 2 sections of the textbook. When it comes to that last section on moral issues, moral problems, I'm going to I'm going to divide those topics up amongst you students. And then you're going to take what we learned in module 1, 2, and 3, what we learned about critical thinking and philosophical argumentation, and what we've learned about moral theories, and you're going to apply that to your paper on censorship and free speech, and also to your class presentation, which will be a topic assigned to you. Okay, so
Excuse me, Professor.
go ahead.
Could you repeat that one more time about the presentation?
Well, you're going to do one, and I'm going to assign you a topic from the final section of the textbook. So part 3 of the textbook is titled Moral Problems. And when we get closer, I have to let the roster kind of settle because some students are going to drop. So when we get a little closer and the roster is kind of fixed, we know who's going to stay with the class, then I will do a schedule. And on that schedule, I will assign you one of the topics from part 3 of the textbook on moral problems. And what you'll do is you'll give a 5 to 8 minute presentation. Now, this isn't a research project. So you're not like, if let's just say, for example, you were assigned the topic abortion. I'm not asking you to give a presentation on what abortion is about or what some people think about abortion, what other people say about abortion. This is a position that you are taking. So you're developing an argument, which means we got to get through philosophical argumentation so you'll know what an argument is. But you're going to present an argument defending or supporting your position. So let's just say I was given the topic abortion. So I'm going to read up on abortion. I'm going to look at all the sides of abortion, and then I'm going to determine where I stand on the issue. And then I'm going to develop an argument in favor of the position that I take on that topic. And I'm going to present it in a 5 to 8 minute presentation. Okay? All right. Any questions? Other questions? Did I answer your question on that? We'll talk much more about this. This is going to be due towards the end of the semester, and we'll talk much more about it. But don't panic over this, right? You're gonna understand clearly when we get closer how to do the position paper and the presentation. It's a little confusing to you at the moment because in both cases I tell you it's a position paper in which you're going to develop an argument in favor of your position, but we don't quite yet know exactly what an argument is, a philosophical argument, right? So we're going to have to get through that lecture material and do some exercises in developing and analyzing and evaluating arguments so that you know what you're going to be doing. Okay? This is often too a time that we can open up and discuss some of these issues, right? And then, of course, we're going to have a midterm and a final exam. Those will be multiple choice. We'll take them here in class. In that case, we'll start the exam at 6:10 on the day the exam is due, and we'll have the rest of the class period no, I take that back. Normally we would, because in a regular class meeting 2 days a week, we would meet from 6 to 7:20. In this class, since it's 2 hours and 50 minutes long, you'll have 70 minutes to take the exam. So it's from 6:10 to 7:20. Okay. There'll be multiple choice. I have study guides. The midterm study guide's already available to you. I'll have the final study guide finished and available to you before too long, so you'll have that well in advance. So in either case, you'll have that study guide available to you and can begin to organize. The midterm exam study guide you already have available to you, so you can access that on Blackboard and begin to organize your material even now as we go, as you see what topics are going to be may appear on the exam, because only what's mentioned on that study guide will be on the exam. So you can begin already to look at that study guide and organize your material so that you'll be organized and ready to study when we get closer to the exam date. Okay, underneath that here is an important due date box. And this will be crucial for you because this will tell you when these assignments are due. This same due date box is posted on Blackboard. I'll show you. Also, the due dates are listed in the assignment folders. And then also remember, I will be reminding you each class what's coming due. But this is a good thing to be aware of. Now, let's scroll down to the course calendar, and let me show you just how to read the course calendar. If you look at the far left-hand side, that's the date. So this is August 28th. We're going to do the topic, the next box to the right is topics for discussion. We're going to do an introduction to the class, go over the syllabus and Blackboard, and then get into module, an introduction to the class, right? Now on Blackboard, that first lecture will be listed in the Module 1 folder. Starting next class on the 4th, we'll get into Module 1 proper, in which we're talking about critical thinking and critical reading. And you'll notice here
I
how
have a question.
go ahead.
So just looking at the calendar, are you wanting everything listed done by these dates? Or
Yeah,
is it what's
yeah,
going to be due after those dates?
so my preference is that you read the material prior to the class. Of course, you can't do that tonight because I have, I'm just letting you know. You'll have to that morality and moral philosophy and the Crito and the Phaedo. Read those when you can, right? When you get a chance. But try to do the reading prior to class. I'm not going to have any way of knowing that you have. And if you don't get to something before class, something comes up and you don't get it, that's fine. Just do the reading when you can. It's preferable if you get it done before class, and that way we're more prepared to discuss it and ask any questions on it.
Okay, and
So
the
that
ones that say BB, those will be posted on Blackboard.
yeah. So the
Perfect.
additional reading will always be on, and that's what. Yes, you're absolutely right. The BB in parentheses means that's for Blackboard. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And Professor, for the last exam, do we have to be prepared based on all the readings that we went through in the semester, or just certain readings?
So you're going to be responsible for all lecture material and the reading material, what the assigned readings. Now, in preparation for the exams, like I said, there's a midterm study guide available to you even now. You will be only examined on what is on that study guide. Now, if your question is the final exam, does it cover everything from the beginning of the semester? Is it comprehensive? No. Um, so typically, the midterm exam is going to cover everything prior to the midterm, and then the final exam will cover material from after that we engaged after the midterm, but before the final.
Perfect. Thank you.
Now, that still leaves a lot of material, right? You're right. It leaves a lot of material. So I've narrowed, the reason I make the study guides available to you is to narrow down, because that would be me asking too much of you to read everything and be responsible for it on the exam. I know some professors do that. That's a bit excessive, I think. So what I've done is I've narrowed down on the study guides. I've narrowed down the readings for you to be prepared to be examined on. Okay. All right. And then also notice, say for September 4th, there at the after the additional reading folder in the first box, I say read What is Water by David Foster Wallace. It's a PDF, and I say read that for class discussion. So you'll see there are readings that I want you to read for class discussion because that's going to kind of get us into the material. So what I want you to do is read What is Water by David Foster Wallace and be prepared at the beginning of class to enter into and engage in a discussion of that reading. Okay. So that's all the way through. You'll see September 11th, we'll begin Module 2. And you have readings from the textbook, some readings from the additional reading folder. If I scroll on down, you see highlighted in yellow, midterm exam. We'll take that on October 9th. And then after the exam, we'll take a break, and then we'll come back and begin Module 3, and I'll do a lecture on Module 3. You'll notice here November 20th through December 4th, class presentations. So, and here are the topics. So from starting November 20th, you, student body, will be presenting this material. And you will be presenting this material using all that you've learned from Module 1 on critical thinking and philosophical argumentation and the other modules on moral theories. So you'll use that, the moral theories, and you'll use philosophical argumentation to determine or to argue for the position that you take on the issue. So you might be assigned any of these topics. I just sort of have a lottery system where your name comes up and then I plug it in. So you may present on world hunger, immigration, racism, sexism, reparations, sexual harassment, prostitution, animal rights, the environment. Okay. And we'll talk much more about that. Like I said, we have a whole lecture on how to write the paper, which will also help you because the presentation and the paper are two different things. The paper, everyone writes on the same topic, free speech and censorship. But again, it's a position paper, and you are just practicing in written form, developing an argument in favor of your position. The only difference with the presentation is this: it's a different topic. I'm going to assign you a topic, and you are going to practice presenting your argument orally. Okay? But they're both the development of an argument, so they're constructed in the same way. So what we say about writing the paper will also apply to developing an argument that you'll present in oral form. Okay. And then on December 4th, we'll wrap up and review, and on the 11th, we'll have the final exam. And if you scroll on down, have an attendance policy there. I don't take roll after I certify the rosters. I'm not going to take roll. This is a college course. You should be responsible by now to. I do have a note here: missing 5 or more class sessions may result in the grade reduction of 1 letter grade. I reserve the right to do that, but I don't. Like I said, I don't take roll. So withdrawals, if you can't complete the course, it's up to you to withdraw. The final withdrawal date is Thursday, November 20th. I will not do an instructor-initiated withdrawal. If you can't finish the course, then you need to withdraw on your own. If you don't complete the course and your name is on the roster at the end of the semester, I'll have to give you a grade. Missed work, just read this carefully. Get your work turned in on time. I'm not a stickler, but I do say that a missing assignment or exam that has not been completed and submitted within 6 class days, that's 3 weeks of the due date, may result in a 0 grade. Okay. Just communicate with me. If you can't get something turned in, if something comes up, communicate with me. Scholastic dishonesty, plagiarism, just don't do that. Generative artificial intelligence and large language models, don't use AI to write your material. I mean, believe it or not, it's fairly easy for us to recognize when AI has written something, usually because it's rather broad and shallow. Um, so I say you can use AI in a limited sense, and that is you can use it to sort of generate ideas and do some research, but write your own stuff. You're capable of that, or you wouldn't be here. And so the other problem with AI is, when you type something in and AI constructs something for you, it's just pulling from various places on the web, right? And it doesn't cite. Right? So if you use somebody else's material, you have to cite it, or it's plagiarism. When students use generative AI and it writes material for them, it doesn't cite anything. So that you're basically guilty of plagiarism. So just don't do that, right? Just don't use AI in that way. Don't use AI to generate responses to questions, say on the discussion board, or to write your paper or your presentation. Just don't do that. All right, I'll let you read the rest of that um, yourself. Any questions over the syllabus?
Um, can we use AI to grammar check or fix any grammar?
So here's the thing. I mean, this isn't an English course, so I'm not all that concerned about grammar and punctuation and that sort of thing. Sometimes if a student's got a lot of grammatical errors and stuff, I'll point them out myself, but I don't deduct points for it. So I would rather that you not, and that you just practice improving your writing. But again, as long as you are writing the content of your material, then I'm not all that concerned about it, right? So if you use Grammarly or something like that to correct your grammar, I'm not that bothered by it. As long as the software isn't writing your material for you. Okay. Any other questions on the syllabus? All right, here's what I'm going to do. We'll take a break here in just a moment, but let me hit stop share. And I want to just go over to Blackboard. Hold on just one second. I want to go over to Blackboard for a moment and just walk through it very quickly. Okay, so you should see Blackboard there on your screens. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here. I think it's pretty intuitive. Welcome and start. That's the first folder here. If I open that up, um, you have some information about me. You can read that if you're interested. The college likes us to put that there because sometimes students want to know what qualifies the professor for teaching a class like this. Um, so I've taught at ACC now. This is my 18th year. I taught at Texas State University. I taught at the University of Dallas. I did my undergraduate work in organizational behavior at the University of San Francisco. I did a master's degree in religious study, a master's degree in philosophy. I did a doctorate degree in religion and culture, and I did a doctorate degree in UT Dallas in the history of ideas, where I studied the relationship of science and religion. So basically, I have always been concerned on those formative forces that shape how we see and understand the world and our place in it. Religion and culture, two very powerful forces that shape how we see and understand the world and our place in it. And they're also mutually constitutive, right? They shape and one another. There's an influence of culture on religion and religion on culture. There's also another very powerful formative force, and that's science and technology. And those three forces. There are other forces, right? Politics is another force, but these are major forces that sort of shape how we see and understand the world. probably one of the most formative forces for, especially for your generation, has been technology, science and technology. So I went and did a PhD where I basically studied the relationship of science and technology to culture and religion. So that's sort of what qualifies me to teach a course like this. I'm not a very interesting person, so there's not a whole lot there and about the professor that you would find interesting, but I put it there if you want to take a look at it. Underneath that, the syllabus. That's the syllabus for the course. It's always available to you. You can print it out if you would like. Um, if I open that course syllabus folder, you have the syllabus that will be there all semester long. You can use that if you happen to lose the one that I emailed to you. Here is a more in-depth statement on the use of AI. So take a few minutes and just read through that. It's only about a page long, but it goes into much more detail as to my rationalization on when AI would be justified and when it would not. Just below that, important due date box, I can click on there. There's that important due dates box from the syllabus. And then here, if you lose your link, the link to Zoom that I emailed out to you, you can always just come and link to Zoom from here. And then just underneath that, past Zoom sessions. After each lecture session, as soon as Zoom is done processing the lecture, I'll post it there in the past Zoom session folder. Since class goes to almost 9 o'clock, it may be Friday morning before I get the lecture posted for you, but I will get the lecture posted. Okay, so you can always access the past Zoom sessions from there. Now, the module folder, again, if I open up module 1, which is critical thinking and philosophical reasoning, I have two topics within module 1. The first is critical thinking. If I open that up, you'll see I ask the question, what is critical thinking? And I venture an answer. You can read that. I give you a definition of critical thinking. You can read that. Here's the additional reading folder. Open that up. If I open up the additional reading folder, notice I give you the instructions here. So this is a link to the critical thinking web, but when you open that up, I only want you to read tutorials C1 through C3 and then watch the videos on C8. So when you open this up, you'll notice there's a lot of other stuff on here. There are 10 tutorials and then this related resources and further reading, and some of them might even have a little quiz at the end. You don't have to do any of that. Just read the tutorials that I have assigned. That's all you have to do there. Okay. And there's What is Water by David Foster Wallace. This the lecture slide folder, that's all my lecture slides. I make them all available to you. You can use them however you want. You can use them to study from for the final or for the midterm. You can use them to study for the quizzes. Some students like to print them out in note-taking form and take notes on them. They're there for you to use however you'd like to use them. Okay. The second topic, critical thinking and, reasoning and argumentation. Same thing. You open that up. What is philosophical reasoning? I have the additional reading folder, the lecture slides available to you. And then I have, lastly, module assignments. Open that up, and there will be the assignments that will be due within that module. In module 1, we only have this assignment, argument analysis worksheet. Notice I have the due date listed there. So you have the due dates all over the place. Okay, and you'll do the same thing for every module. Every module will have the additional reading folder, my lecture slides, and also the assignments folder. Okay, and then any announcements that I have, I'll use this announcement folder. Notice I sent out a welcome announcement. Today I posted the philosophy tutor information. So if any time during the semester you need to use the philosophy tutor, all of the philosophy tutor's information is available there and will be all semester long so that you can contact him and get any help that you need from him. So this is the main form of communication I will use to get information to you. So what I'll do, usually when something's coming due, I'll remind you. I'll post an announcement here reminding you, argument analysis worksheet is due Friday. Whatever information I need to get to you, I'll do that using this announcement section. Okay. Otherwise, the modules are set up just the same. Module 3 on moral theories. What is a theory? Additional reading folder, lecture slide folder, and assignments folder. We're reading quiz 2. We'll take that while we're in module 3. So when that day comes, you'll access reading quiz 3 in this folder here. Okay? And we'll talk more about that. I'll remind you as we go. All right, any questions over Blackboard?
Professor, your
Yeah.
lecture note or slides cover all quizzes and exam that we
Well,
can.
the material that will be on the quizzes and exam, I will discuss in class, so there will be material relative to that on the slides. You see what I'm saying? I mean, so in the slides, I may not directly answer a question that is on the quiz, but I will have covered the material that on the quiz, the reading that the quiz, the readings that the quiz that you'll be quizzed on.
So if we study the slides or the lecture that you put it in Blackboard, so by that way we can answer the question and the quizzes and the exam, right? You not mention any question, but if we study, we know.
Yes. Yeah, well, okay, keep in mind though, on the quizzes, you'll be quizzed on the material prior to my lecture. Because the quizzes are intended for you to engage in a critical reading of the text, but you can, as you're reading that material for the quiz, you can look at my slides because those are lecture notes and they may be very helpful for you understanding what's going on in the reading. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the short answer is yes, my slides will be helpful in your studying for the quiz. But I won't have lectured on that material prior to you taking the quiz. Now I will for the final and the midterm. I will have lectured on that material. So you'll have my lecture, the slides, and your class notes to study for the midterm and the final. But for the quiz, you'll have the text from the textbook, the reading from the textbook, and you can use my slides. Okay, did I answer your question? I know that sounds a little confusing, but the slides are available to you all along, and you can use them. They will be helpful if you read through them. Like in quiz 1, you're going to read and be quizzed on Julia Driver's essay titled "Subjectivism." You'll take that quiz before I lecture on subjectivism. But you can still go to my slides prior to the quiz as you study for the quiz, and my slides would probably be helpful in understanding that text.
So the slides that you're gonna use after the quiz, right after the quiz, are gonna be available all the time.
They're available even
Okay.
right now. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So yes, so the readings that you'll be quizzed on, the slides are always available to you. Now, there's an exception to that rule. I don't have any slides for module 4, which is where you guys, the students, will present the material. So for the for quizzes 3 and 4, uh, you won't have slides because that's in module 4 and I don't have slides because I don't do those lectures you do. So you'll just have the text available to you there. Let me let me just make sure real quick. I know it's going to be the case for quiz 4. Yes, quizzes 3 and 4 are going to come from the last section of the textbook on moral problems, and that you guys do the lecture. I don't lecture on it, so I won't have slides available for. So for quiz 1 and quiz 2, you'll have slides available to use in preparation. For quiz 3 and 4, you won't. Okay. Other questions?
So each quiz is just questions about what we have read.
Yes, but we'll have to talk about critical reading, but critical reading is reading in light of trying to understand what the author is doing in the text. And one of the confusing things is in secondary education, we're typically taught to read in light of trying to figure out what might be on an exam. So we're looking for names, dates, places, things in boxes, italicized, bolded, definition, that sort of thing. That's not going to help you so much here. Now we're wanting to know what the author is doing in the text. Right? What are the main points the author is making, and how is the author making that point? What argument is the author making? Okay, so these will not be quizzes that you will have a question and then you can look for a sentence just to plug in to the answer, right? So you're going to have to read those texts carefully and understand what the author is doing. We'll talk more about this as we get closer, especially when we talk about critical reading. Okay, so you are going to have to spend a little time reading those texts prior to taking the quiz. Other questions? Okay, I have 7:33. So let's take about let's see, that'd be 7:43. Let's take about 12 minutes. Let's come back at 7:45 and then we'll get into the lecture on basically introducing ethics, talking about what ethics is all about and that sort of thing. So let's take a break, get a drink, a snack, hit the restroom, stretch, come back at 7:45 and see if we can get through lecture 1. Okay, I'm going to pause the recording here. And if I forget to unpause it, somebody please remind me, and then we'll come back together and we'll finish up for the evening. We'll start again at 7:45. Okay, let's come back together and get started. Before we get into this lecture, let me just say, if you're still a little nervous over some of those assignments, again, remember, we're going to talk about them more as we get closer to them. The paper and the presentation I'll talk at much more length about. But maybe this will set your mind at ease. Understand, I'm here to help you. All you have to do is communicate with me. I'm here to help you. I want you to be successful. I'm not here to weed anybody out. I take no pleasure in students doing poorly in my class. I take absolutely no pleasure in students failing my class. As a matter of fact, probably 98 or 99% of the students who fail my class do so because they drop out, but they don't withdraw from the class. In other words, something comes up and they can't finish the semester, so they just stop coming to class and doing the work, so they turn nothing in, but they don't withdraw from the class. Now, there could be reasons for that because maybe they haven't, several W's on their transcripts already and don't need another one or can't have another one, so they just take the failing grade. But that's typically why. I mean, my point is, if you want to pass the class, you're going to pass the class because I'm going to work with you and help you get through it. I may not be able to get you an A, but I will certainly get you through the class and get you, to where you're understanding the material and can work with it. Okay, so again, don't panic, don't get frustrated. I'm here to help you. I will help you, and I'm not here to try to weed anybody out or anything like that. So maybe that'll set your mind at ease. We'll work together and we'll get this material down. And, you'll see that it's not as difficult as it sounds, but it's just new material. Most of you have not taken a philosophy class before. You haven't taken an ethics class before, so it's going to be new material, especially in the philosophical argument part of Module 1. Okay, so let that set your mind at ease. Okay, let's get into Lecture 1, morality and moral philosophy. And here we just want to get a general idea of what ethics is and why we should even be concerned about it. Well, one of the reasons is because we do it all the time. But let's begin by just looking at the terms themselves. Ethics. What is ethics? Well, ethics is the study of morality. Now, that seems rather circular or redundant because we might ask, isn't ethics and morality the same thing? Well, if we go back etymologically, that is, if we trace these words back to their Greek and Latin origin, yes, ethics and morality both mean something like tradition. But in contemporary discourse and contemporary discussion, we typically think of ethics as the systematic study of morality. What then is morality? Morality refers to beliefs or values concerning right, wrong, good, and bad. These beliefs would often include things like moral judgments, values, rules, principles, and theories. So we can think of it this way. Morality typically refers to a set of moral values that a people do in fact have, right? They're a set of beliefs and values that a certain people hold. Ethics is the philosophical or systematic study of those values. So ethics is we could think of as the philosophical study of morality, that set of beliefs and values that a people do in fact hold. In the United States, we refer to this systematic study of morality as ethics. In Europe, they typically refer to it as moral philosophy. It's the same thing. Moral philosophy, ethics, it's the same thing. That's why I say ethics or moral philosophy. Okay, so moral beliefs help guide our actions, define our values, and give reasons for being the very types of persons that we are. Now, we're going to talk about values later, but values are important to us because values are those things that we hold dear. They're beliefs that are valued for a reason, and that's because they shape who we are and how we understand ourselves. So, why should we even concern ourselves with ethics? Because we're social beings, and as social beings, we have to get along together. There have to be rules for behavior. And since we do this every day, it's good if we understand how we do it. In other words, think of it this way. We're going to try to answer the question, especially in Module 3 when we get to moral theories, what makes a right action right and a wrong action wrong? If I say an action is wrong, what makes it wrong? Is it because of the way I feel about it? Is there something more to it than that? And also think of it this way. When we say that action X is wrong, whatever X stands for, when we say abortion is wrong or euthanasia is wrong or whatever, whenever we say that an action is wrong, we are in essence saying you're not at liberty to do that, right? You're not free to do that action. And if we limit people's freedoms to do something, we should only do so with good reason. In other words, most of us sort of make moral decisions based on our feelings. We live in a society that values feelings and emotions. We sort of prioritize those. And we have a tendency to kind of think that something is right or true based on how it makes us feel. Now, we are emotive beings as much as we are rational beings, but an action isn't made right or wrong by how I feel about it. Actually, should just be the other way around. How I feel about it should be determined by whether or not the action is right or wrong. So if action X is wrong, action X is not wrong because I feel bad about it. I disapprove of it, right? I disapprove of it because there's some reason why I believe action X is wrong. So we're going to find that as we think through this, reason is going to be the primary means by which we determine the moral worth of an action. That is, when I use that term moral worth of an action, that simply means whether an action is right or wrong. So if we determine that ethics, moral decision making, the rightness or wrongness of an action is based on nothing more than the way we feel about it, then there's no way to mitigate conflict, right? Because I might feel good about action X and you might feel just the opposite, right? I might, as a matter of fact, I might find action X, I might find it, I might have an approving attitude towards it, let's say, and you may have a disapproving attitude towards it. How do we mitigate that conflict? And then also think of it this way. Sometimes, especially in in-person classes, when we meet, I'll ask at the very beginning of the semester, how many of you think that morality is just up to you as an individual? Whether it's right, wrong, good, bad, it's just up to you as an individual. Usually about upper 80s to 90% of the class will raise their hand. Okay, well, that's not altogether wrong, but do we really think that all morality or all ethics is about is my personal opinion about it? We'll call that relativism. We'll see when we get into theories. And the problem with that is we don't really believe that. We don't live that way. There will be some point in my life in which I think somebody has done me wrong and should have known that what they were doing is wrong. And I'm not going to accept from them, well, I don't feel like it's wrong. Because I'm going to respond back, well, you may not feel like it's wrong, but it is. And you wronged me. Right? So we're not going to, we really don't live like we actually do believe. It's just up to my opinion or my feelings about it. But that's typically our approach when we haven't really thought deeply about what it is that makes a wrong action wrong. Why would we consider an action to be wrong and therefore argue that people aren't at liberty to do it? Okay, well, that's what we're going to work on this entire semester. So, ethics we can think of as the systematic or philosophical study of morality. Morality is that set of beliefs and values that a people do, in fact, hold. And these values will define how we see and understand ourselves. So what is at stake here? Well, everything we hold dear, right? Ethics is concerned with values, specifically moral values. And through the critical evaluation of moral values, we determine what the most important things are in our lives, what is worth living for and what is worth dying for. We decide what is the greatest good. When we talk about something being the greatest good, we're talking about that which is of the utmost value, right? If something is a good, we value that, right? Like health is a good, so we value health. Truth is a good, we value truth. Why might we value truth, and why might truth become a value? Well, think of it this way. As social beings, we live in societies, and societies have a goal, an end to which they strive. And usually that end is to prosper, to thrive. We call it flourishing, to flourish. If a society wants to thrive, what does it need? Well, it needs peace and stability. And in order to have peace and stability, you need cooperation. We know that cooperation is preferable to conflict. You're not going to thrive or flourish if society is constantly in conflict. And so we need cooperation. The only way we can achieve cooperation is through trust, and trust requires truth. So if I'm going to build trust so that we can cooperate, because the only way we're going to cooperate is if we trust one another, and the only way we can build cooperation is through trust, and the only way we can become a peaceful, stable society is if we have cooperation over conflict. You see where this is going. Then trust becomes a value, which means truth becomes a value. And so now we have this value of truth telling, which would be deteriorated if we had some principle that says it's okay to lie. Right? I mean, think about that. Why do we value truth telling? Well, because it's essential to trust and cooperation. Lying is just the opposite. Lying destroys trust, which destroys cooperation, and lying leads to conflict. So there's a reason why we would say that we would develop certain values and see other things as vices. So we see truth as a value while lying is a vice. So we think of these goods. Prosperity is a good, health is a good, and so on. And actions that promote those goods are morally appropriate actions. But there's a sense also in which this whole endeavor helps us to set goals, to sort of look at the goals that are worthy of pursuit, those things that we should pursue, in addition to what virtues we should cultivate, like the virtue of honesty, right? A virtue is just a deeply ingrained character trait. Why would we value honesty in persons? Because the honest person is the person who lives up to the principle of truth telling. And remember, we've already talked about why we would value truth telling. So the person who tells the truth contributes to the overall health of society, right, by avoiding lying, which in turn produces conflict. Okay, so it also helps us to determine what duties we should fulfill and what values we should put on human life and what pain we should be willing to endure for the sake of the common good, for the sake of justice, and for the sake of human rights. So, thinking about our actions, thinking about how we determine the moral worth of those actions, thinking about the values that are necessary to move society in the direction that we would like to see it go, that is the direction of flourishing and thriving. These are all parts of ethics, and this is what makes ethics important. So, why would we bother thinking about ethics? Well, it concerns personal freedoms and liberties. You can't prosper as a society, you can't flourish as a society, you can't thrive if you have no freedoms, if you have no liberties. Freedom is essential, liberty is essential to flourishing. And so we can think about what actions are conducive to flourishing and what actions aren't. We can think of what goods are necessary to flourishing and therefore value them. Freedom is necessary to flourishing. So that means if we're going to limit people's freedoms, we should only do so with good reason. It has to be something like this, that we limit certain liberties because those liberties are not conducive to human flourishing. As a matter of fact, they do just the opposite. Secondly, it concerns what is most important in life and why. It gives us some sense of the reason why we value certain things. It tells us why freedom is important. It tells us why truth telling is important. And it also allows us to be intellectually consistent in our moral decision making because we know how it is that we should think through these moral problems. We can understand why we hold certain things to be of value and other things not. We understand why we see certain things as virtues and others as vices. So, the importance of ethics then, well, our social connections with others necessitate that we consider our actions, since our actions always affect others. Actions have consequences. Consequences ripple out beyond ourselves and impact the lives of others. And since we are social beings, that is, we live in societies, we're always already engaged in a network of social relationships, we have a responsibility to act in a way that mitigates to the extent possible the harm our actions cause to others. Because we want others to act responsibly so that their actions don't impact me. Well, others always are involved in moral decision making since we're social beings. So there's a sense in which morality wouldn't be necessary if we weren't social beings, if we didn't live in societies, if I lived on an island unto myself, maybe I wouldn't need morality at all. So ethics is about choosing the right action, realizing that our actions have consequences. Well, let's take a look at this. This is a bit dated now, but it just kind of gives us an idea. This is a survey that was taken about how people make moral decisions. How do we decide what to do? That was the question, right? The question was asked of those who were polled, how do you determine what to do in any given situation? And here's what the researchers found. 23% of those surveyed said, I would do what is best for everyone involved. Okay, I think that's a good response. We call that the common good. The common good is that which is that good which is common to all. So what the responders are saying here is, I would act in a way that promotes the common good. Now, they may not think of it in those terms, right? They may not understand that. That's what they're saying. But when they say I would do what is best for everybody, basically they are saying I would act according to the common good. I think that's a good response. The problem with that is, how do we determine what the common good is? How do we determine what is good for everyone? How can we know that something is good for everyone? Well, that's part of the complexity of moral decision making. What we're going to see is that moral decision making is always messy, it's always complicated, because the issues are a matter of ethical concern because they're complicated, they're controversial. They wouldn't be a matter of ethics if they were settled, right? If everyone agreed upon it, there would be no ethical issue to discuss. Everyone is in agreement, but it's because people differ in their views, and these issues are controversial. Think of the issues facing us now. Think of war. Think of immigration. Think of health care. Right? Even things that we sometimes don't think about as having a moral component do. Think of back when the government was trying to initiate student loan forgiveness, right? Some with student loans said, hey, that's great. I thought the same thing. I had Parent Plus loans for my daughter. She went to Texas A&M through her undergraduate work and into veterinary school. Graduated veterinary school, a lot of student loans there. Man, that would have been great to have those loans forgiven. But then others would say, well, okay, who's going to pay for that? Where's that money going to come from? And these students knew they were taking out loans and agreed to pay them back. So now do we just allow them to violate these contracts? So there was some dispute, right? Some people were saying it wouldn't be fair. It wouldn't be fair to all those students who paid off their loans. So a debate ensued, and that debate was very much a moral one. It may not sound like it when we talk about student loan forgiveness, but it was a moral debate. And there was great controversy because all moral issues are going to involve controversy. Okay, so 23% said, well, I'm going to try to do what is best for everyone. But again, that's going to be a bit problematic. How do we determine what is best for everyone? How do we determine what is the common good? 20% said, I would follow the advice of an authority, such as a parent or a teacher. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. I would simply say that doesn't go far enough. I would say to that 20%, okay, fine, but when you have something arise in your life that you need to think about, try to work through it, try to think through it, and rather than just say, well, I would do X because that's what my parents always told me, or I believe this about X because that's what I've always been taught. Think about the reasons why your parents would say that. So if somebody comes up to me and says, hey, what do you think about X, whatever action X is? And I say, oh, X is wrong. And they say, okay, why is that? Well, it's what my parents or teachers always taught me. Okay, well, your parents or teachers may be right, but they made that decision. They came to that conclusion, I should say, based on some reason or set of reasons. It would be better for me if I knew the reasons why my parents or my teachers taught me that X is wrong. So that when I'm asked, what do you think about X? And I say, I think X is wrong. And somebody says, why? I can give them reasons. I give you a simple example that's nonsensical, but you would understand it. What if somebody come up and said, what do you think about smoking? And I said, oh, smoking is wrong. And they say, well, why do you think that? And I say, well, my parents and teachers always told me that. Okay, but I'm not really not concerned about what your parents and teachers, I'm just asking you, why do you think it's wrong? Well, I don't really know. I just always been taught that. That's one possible way of doing it. Another possible way is to understand the reasons why X might be wrong, so that if somebody comes up and says, okay, hey, what do you think about smoking? And I say, smoking is wrong. And they say, why do you think that? Well, because it's hazardous to your health. It causes cancer, and we shouldn't engage in behaviors that are hazardous to our health. Now, that's a silly example, but you get my point. Just appealing to the authority falls short. Right? Doesn't mean the authority's wrong, doesn't mean we shouldn't listen to them, but it would be better for us to know the reasons why our parents or teachers would teach us that. Look, 18% said I'd do whatever makes me happy. That's kind of hedonistic, right? That's rather selfish, right? I'd do what. Now, happiness is important, and we'll have a whole lecture on happiness. Don't get me wrong, happiness is important, but if I'm just concerned about my own happiness, that's not going to work, because I could think of things that would make me happy that would be harmful to others, right? Like if you had something of great value and I took it from you, that would make me happy because now I have this thing of great value. But just because it made me happy wouldn't make it right. I'm not right to steal from you what is rightfully yours simply because it makes me happy. That's going to be a bit problematic. 16% said, I would do what God or the scriptures say is right. Okay, that's going to fall prey to the same problem as authority above, parents or teachers. Nothing wrong with taking your moral values from your religious tradition. Nothing wrong with that. And don't let anybody ever tell you that it is. I know we have plenty of people who are very negative towards religion, towards God or religious text. But one of the main functions of religion is to establish a set of values that work toward the common good of society. I would say this, okay, if you take your values from a religious tradition, from a religious text, okay, that's perfectly fine. But it would be better to understand why your religious tradition teaches that, why that religious text teaches that. So again, if I'm asked, what do you think about X? And I say, oh, I think X is wrong. And somebody says, well, why do you think that? Well, God said, or well, the Bible says, or whatever religious text, or well, my religious tradition teaches. Okay, maybe that person that's talking to you, maybe that person doesn't believe in God, doesn't believe in the Bible, and doesn't care about the religious tradition. Well, we're at a dead end. We can't talk any further because there's no connection. But what if I understood the reason my religious tradition teaches that X is wrong? Well, then I can just, instead of just appealing to the authority, I can go to the reasons. Okay, 10% said I would do whatever improved my own situation. Okay, well, I'm going to act in a way that benefits me. That's problematic. I can act in a way that benefits me that brings harm to others, and the fact that I'm benefited isn't going to be what justifies the action, especially if it brings harm to others. We always have to consider ourselves because we're just as important as anyone else, but just acting in a way that promotes my own benefit, right, without considering others is going to be problematic. 9% said, I don't know what I would do. Okay, that's fine. Maybe the opportunity will arise for you to think about it, and you can think more carefully through it, and then know what you think about. I would follow my conscience. Okay, 3% said I would follow my conscience. Why is that one going to be problematic, right? Why isn't our conscience going to be the sole indicator of the moral worth of an action? Well, conscience is important, right? Conscience can be a good indicator of the moral worth of an action, but remember, our conscience is conditioned by our upbringing, and that can be good or bad. So, and also think of it this way, it's not our conscience that determines whether the action is right or wrong. Usually our conscience is going to bother us, let's say, in a particular situation because we've always been told that the action is wrong. So if I see somebody steal and I don't do anything about it, my conscience might bother me, but that's because I've always been told you shouldn't steal. Or maybe if I stole something, my conscience would bother me, but it's because I've always been taught that you shouldn't steal. So our conscience is conditioned. Now that doesn't mean that our conscience is bad. We have it for a reason, and our conscience is a good indicator because usually when we've been taught that something is wrong, we've been taught that it's wrong for good reason. But if you think about it, conditioning can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. Let me give you just a quick example. So let's say I was raised in a very racist, bigoted home, and I was taught that certain groups of people are inferior and worthy of ill treatment. And let's say I'm walking down the street one day and I see a group of guys beating up a member of a group that I've always been taught was inferior and worthy of ill treatment, and I just walk on by. My conscience wouldn't bother me at all, right? Because I've been taught they deserve that. Now, that would be an instance of bad conditioning. That would be an instance in which your conditioning is a bad thing because your conscience isn't bothering you when it should. Likewise, let's say I was raised in a home where I was taught that every human being is of equal moral value. Every human being ought to be treated with respect and with dignity. Now I walk down the street and I see that same scenario. I can't just walk on by and do nothing. My conscience would bother me, right? I have to take some action. Okay, that would be a situation in which your conscience is a good thing. Your conditioning, I should say, is a good thing. You've been conditioned to have that response because you've been taught that you don't treat people that way. So we just have to keep that in mind. Conscience can't be the sole indicator of the moral worth of an action because our conscience is conditioned. What we could ask, why does my conscience bother me in this case? Why does my conscience bother me when I steal? Well, it's because I've always been taught that I shouldn't steal. Okay, why have I always been taught that I shouldn't steal? And we'll get to the reasons. If we keep digging, we'll get to the reasons why stealing is wrong. Stealing is wrong because it works against flourishing. It works against thriving because it produces conflict. Okay. Well, the same thing can be said about emotions. We live in a society that really prioritizes emotions, and we have a tendency to think that something is right or good if it produces within me a positive emotional response. But our emotional response isn't what makes the action right or wrong, right? The action itself elicits within us an emotion. And it should be the case. Go back to my other scenario. I'm raised in the bigoted, racist home. I see a group beating up on a member of a group. I see a group of guys beating up on a member of a religious group, an ethnic group, whatever, that I've been taught to hate. My emotional response may be one of approval, of happiness, of joy. That'd be a bad thing. If I'm raised in the home where I taught that everyone is of equal moral worth and I see that, now I have a different emotional response: anger, frustration. Okay. So it's not our emotional response that makes the action right or wrong. As a matter of fact, our emotional response is elicited because of some set of reasons, right? That is, we have always been taught that you don't treat people like that. And it's because that action violates a moral principle that is already in place that it elicits within me a particular emotional response, an emotional response of disapproval. So again, we're emotive beings as much as we are rational beings, but emotions can't be the determining factor for the moral worth of an action. Something is not true or right or good simply because it elicits a particular feeling in me. It should be the opposite, that the action elicits a good feeling, a positive emotion from me, because in fact, it's good or right. Okay. So we have the same problem, right? We cannot get around the fact that we're emotional beings, right? We're emotive beings, and morality is every moral issue is going to involve our emotions, right? But emotions are often the product of our psychological needs and our conditioning, just as our conscience is. So it falls prey to the same problems that conscience does. Okay, well, let's think just for a moment of a little thought experiment here. Let's think through a little thought experiment here. This is kind of just to give us an idea of the complexity of moral decision making, right? What all is involved in moral decision making? Let's think about how facts matter to moral decision making, right? The facts are going to help us determine what value we place on the action. Let's think of this little scenario for a moment. Now, this is a thought experiment, so we don't want to get bogged down in all the details. But let's say you work at a train yard. You work on a train yard, and you're the person there in the middle with the question mark. That's you. And you're working in the train yard, and you hear this commotion, a train whistle blowing, and you look and you see that the train is barreling down the track and it's out of control. And you realize that it's blowing its whistle because on the track directly in front of the train are 5 people and they can't get off the track. So you see this train is barreling out of control, trying to get the attention of those 5 people on the track, and you know that train is not going to stop before it hits those 5 people, but those 5 people can't get off the track. You notice that you're standing next to a lever, and if you pull that lever, you can divert the train to the track on the left. But as you realize that, you also notice there is a person on that track who can't get off. You get the picture now, right? This is a moral dilemma. This is not a win-win situation. Someone's going to die. Okay, now let's say that the people on the track, they're all rail workers. You don't know any of them personally. They're all rail workers, and they're all about the same age and health. What do you do? Now, the direction of the train is straight ahead. The intended direction, the destination of the train is straight ahead. That's where the train is supposed to be going. Now, neither you nor the conductor of the train have any responsibility for those people being on the track. But you see that if the train continues straight, its destination, it's going to hit 5 people. You can pull a lever, divert the train to the left, but you realize there the train is going to hit 1 person. Now, again, you don't know any of them personally, and they're all about the same age and health. So what do you do? Well, you have a choice. You can allow the train to go straight, or you can pull the lever, switching the train to the track on the left. Now, just think about this. Typically, I put a survey up asking how many of you would pull the lever and how many of you would let the train go straight. I forgot to activate the poll, the survey before class. So let's just think about it. What do you do? Right? What do you do? And what all has to be considered as you, of course, you have to act quickly here, but what all has to be considered? Now, remember, the train's destination is straight ahead. Neither you nor the conductor of the train have any responsibility for those people being on the track. You don't know any of those people personally on the track, and they're all about the same age and health. What do? You can either flip the switch and divert the train to the track on the left or let it go straight. For those of you who are thinking, I would pull the lever and switch the train to the track on the left. Feel free to unmute your mic and just give me the reasoning behind that. How do you think through that, and why would you divert the train to the track on the left? Somebody tell me.
I would divert the train because logically speaking, I would be, we would lose 1, but we would keep 5.
Okay, right. So when you think about that, there's a theory that kind of goes along with this that we'll talk about in Module 3 called utilitarianism. And the idea there is that I would act in a way that produced the greater good for the greater number of people. In other words, if somebody has to die, better only 1 than 5. Okay, before I say too much more, anyone else want to jump in and tell me how you thought through it?
I
Yeah,
felt the
I was.
same way.
Oh,
Oh, sorry.
no, good.
No, yeah, I was just saying I felt the same way because while it's still unfortunate that 1 person would die, it would affect 1 person's family versus 5 people's families and everybody that those 5 people impact as well. So it's just 1 person versus the 5. It's everybody that the 5 people affect versus the 1 person that the 1 person affects. So it's even a little bit bigger just than the 1 and the 5.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. So it's the same sort of thing. If the idea you could state it in the positive that I'm going to act in a way that produces the greater good for the greater number of people. So better only 1 die than 5. You only have 1 family grieving as opposed to 5. Or put in the negative, I'm going to act in the way that mitigates the greatest harm. Right. I'm going to act in a way to mitigate as much harm as possible. So you're going to do that by sparing the most lives possible. Okay, somebody else had a comment?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that if you can't completely prevent death, that the kind of second best is to like reduce as much as possible.
Yeah, reduce the harm as much as possible. Yes. Okay. Somebody else?
I have a question.
Hmm.
Is there a stop button?
No, it's not that easy.
Okay, thank you.
I've seen this example where it was like if you stop the train it would derail, but there's like far more people on the train that would be at harm than on either of the tracks.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean there are a lot of these trolley problem these are moral dilemmas is what we call them, moral dilemmas, and there are a lot of variations to this. Um, but what I want to do is just kind of get us thinking about how we think through what actions we would take in any given situation. Now, typically, when I put up the poll, about 90% of the class, 90 to 95% of the class is going to say, given the scenario I just gave you, 90 to 95% are going to say, I would divert the train because if someone has to die, better one than five. But I'll have 5% or so say I leave the train going in its intended direction. I would not do anything, right? I have no culpability in any of this, and the train's destination is straight ahead, so I'm going to let it go straight ahead. How many of you said you would not flip the switch? Or let me put it this way: if you said you would not pull the lever and divert the train, why would you not pull the lever?
Legal action.
Okay, so you might be thinking of litigation, legal action that would be taken because look, if and there, that's legitimate, right? You're thinking of yourself, but in this case, but you have to, right? You're responsible for yourself. So you're saying, well, look, I have no culpability in any of this. I'm not responsible for any of it. If I just leave it alone, sure, five people are gonna die, but I'm not responsible for it. But if I pull that lever, I've chosen who's going to die. Now I am responsible in some sense for that one person's death. Anyone have any other reason why they would leave the train going straight ahead?
I would be nervous that I would make the wrong decision or hit the wrong button or do something wrong on the lever. So I would, because there's not enough time. So I wouldn't pull it just because I don't have enough time to think through it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, these moral problems are all very difficult, and there's a lot of things that we have to keep in mind. And so, sort of what you're saying is, I've got to consider my abilities, right? Do I know enough to make a clear decision here? So most of the time, people will say something like this: I would leave the train going straight. I would not pull the lever, in other words, because that's straight ahead is the destination of the train, right? Granted, making no decision is still to make a decision, right? You decided not to decide, but they would say, well, if I flip that switch, I have chosen who dies. I have purposely made a choice to take the life of that one person. And they might say something like this: I have a moral principle that says one ought never intentionally cause the harm of another person. So, in one case, the case where we pull the lever and divert the train because we say, well, if somebody has to die, better one than five, right? So then I'm going to act in a way that produces the greater good for the greater number of people. We'll see in module 3, that's called utilitarianism. Always act in a way that produces the greater good for the greater number of people. We might say to the person who says, I'm going to let it go straight because that's its destination, and I can't play God here. I can't purposely take the life of another. In other words, I can't intentionally harm another person, and I would be intentionally harming that person if I pulled the lever. We might call that a deontological theory or a duty-based theory, where I act out of duty to a moral principle. So I have a moral principle that says one ought never to intentionally cause the harm of another person, and in this case, I would do that. So I'm not going to violate a principle. Now, let's do this. Let's keep this scenario. Everything's the same except this. Now you are standing there at the lever, but what you realize is that the people straight ahead on the track, they're very elderly. They just let's just say they just left the nursing home, got tired of the nursing home food. They're heading to Popeyes, but they got themselves on the track and they're not going to be able to get off. You know they're very elderly. You see them hobbling along with their walkers and canes. And so you say, well, I can flip the switch, but you look to the track on the left and you see one very young child, about 5 years old. Does that change your mind? How many of you who said earlier that you would flip the switch when all things were equal, they were all of equal age and health, you said you would flip the switch because better one die than five. How many of you now would think differently if the five were very elderly and the one was very young? Now, here's the point behind this. We, in our culture especially, we place a special value on the very old and the very young. Why is that? Because they're the most vulnerable, especially the very young, because they're the most vulnerable. So now you have two vulnerable classes. So someone who said that you would flip the lever on the first one, but now you wouldn't, tell me why you wouldn't, why you would let the train go straight now.
Yeah, that may change my mind, just mostly because, the elderly people, as, heartbreaking as that is, they've already lived kind of their full lives, whereas the child still has a whole life in front of them.
Yeah, that's going to be the response of most who changed their mind on what they would do in this case. It's basically going to be, well, the elderly have pretty much lived their lives out. The one young child is just beginning. It's tragic, but so it's again, it's a difficult thing, right? You have to make a decision, and the facts are going to matter. Now, that's the purpose of pointing this out. The facts are going to matter. All things being equal, it's clear. Let's act in a way that mitigates the most amount of harm. Let's act in a way that produces the greatest amount of good. But now we change the ages, and that changes things a little bit. It's not, it's, we have a different set of facts, and now we're reasoning a little bit differently. Now, if somebody has to die, it's not better one than five. It's better the elderly than the young. Okay. Now, this is going to bring up a tension that's going to follow us throughout this semester, and that's the tension between the good of the many and justice for one or the few. Two tensions you'll see, and I'll bring this up over and over again. Two tensions follow us throughout this semester. The tension between the good of the many and justice for one or the few, and the other is the tension between governing authority and individual liberty. When is governing authority justified in limiting the liberty of citizens? And we'll talk about both of these tensions throughout the semester. Here you have the tension between the good of the many and justice for one or the few. We know that's the case because if we change things up just a little bit, and now the train is out of control, five people are on the track, they can't get off, but you're on a pedestrian overpass and you see all of this taking place. And now you see that train has its brakes locked. Sparks are flying everywhere. The whistle is sounding. The conductor is doing everything possible to stop that train. But you know it's not going to stop before it hits those people. But you see this very, very large man leaning over the side of the pedestrian overpass. He's leaning over the railing, taking all this in, and you think, man, if I push this guy, he's going to land right on the tracks, and he's big enough to, now that the brakes are applied, sparks are flying everywhere, he's big enough that train hits him, he's going to gum up those wheels, and it's going to stop before it hits those five people. Better one, if somebody has to die, better one than five. But if I ask how many people would push the big man, nobody really seriously would consider pushing the big man. And if I ask, why would you not push the big man? And you would say, well, because that would be a grave injustice. He has no role in any of this. He's just leaning over, looking at all this take place. So there are a couple of things, right? I mean, so we might say, okay, well, what's the difference between pushing the big man here and pulling the lever? Because the big man here has nothing to do with it, but neither does the one on the other track when the intended direction of the train was straight ahead. So how can we justify pulling the lever, but we can't seem to justify pushing the big man? What's the difference? right? I mean, so again, here we're just thinking through the complexity of moral decision making. And one of the reasons that people say, I wouldn't push the big man, is simply because it would be a grave injustice. So the question is, when are we justified in considering the good of the many over justice for one or the few? When is it that we are responsible for ensuring justice for the one or the few? And when are we to act in a way that produces the good of the many? That's a question that we're going to seek to answer as we move through the semester. Okay, so the key here is just to think about how facts are essential to moral decision making, how complex moral decisions can be, and then think about because look, if I took you back to the other scenario and I took it even further and said, okay, now introduce family members into it, well, that's going to change things also, right? Do I know any of these people? How close am I to them? All of that is going to factor into the decision that we would make. All right, for sake of time, let's think of the ethical landscape. We're really going to look at four primary areas of ethics. The first is descriptive ethics, then normative, meta ethics, and applied ethics. Let's just briefly describe what those are. Descriptive ethics, this is just the study of the moral beliefs and practices that a people have, right? The aim here is to describe and explain how people actually do behave and think about moral issues and concepts. Descriptive ethics is just that. It's describing the values that a people do hold. This is what a historian would do, or a sociologist, or a cultural anthropologist. Here, you're not saying what should or should not be done. You're just describing what values these people hold, and it's a descriptive approach, right? It's something like the sociologist or the cultural anthropologist saying this group of people hold these values. Normative ethics, on the other hand, we might call prescriptive, right? This is the study of the principles, rules, or theories that guide our actions and judgments, right? The purpose here is to prescribe how things ought to be. We do normative ethics when we use critical reasoning to demonstrate that a moral principle is justified. So the difference between a descriptive claim, let's say, and a normative claim is this. If I say John lied to Mary, that's just descriptive. I'm just describing to you what John did. John lied to Mary. Now, if I say John should not have lied to Mary, now I'm making a normative claim. I'm not just telling you what John did. I'm telling you that John should not have done that. And then metaethics is the study of the meaning and logical structure of moral beliefs. It seeks to determine what it means for an action to be right and how to determine a moral principle is justified. That's really what we'll be talking about through the semester, is how we determine what makes the right action right and a wrong action wrong. Applied ethics is just a practical application to these theories, particularly in the professions of medicine and law. Okay, now we're going to have to talk a bit about facts and values so that we understand the difference. Let's first talk about facts. What are facts? What do we mean when we talk about a facts? Because facts are essential to moral decision making. We need the facts in order to determine what value to place on the action. Well, facts are just phenomena, things that happen in the world, things that can be empirically verified, right? If I say it's raining outside, right? Well, we can go outside and see, right? And if raindrops are falling from the sky, then we can easily verify that, right? That it's raining outside would just be a fact. That my truck is gray would just be a fact. That my phone is sitting here on the desk next to me, it's just a fact. Facts are things that happen in the world and we can empirically verify them. What does that mean, empirically verify them? We can see them, taste them, touch them, hear them, right? We can test them, we can weigh them, we can measure them, right? So we can observe them. Okay, so facts then provide information that can be used as evidence. And remember, a fact can be proven through empirical verification, right? By experiments or by experience or observation. So facts are things that happen in the world, right? Raindrops falling from the sky, phone sitting on my desk, John slapping Mary or Mary pinching Joe, whatever. These are just facts, things that happen that we can empirically verify, that we can see them, we can prove them, right, through observation, we can weigh them, measure them, test them, and so on. So what then is truth? And what's the relationship between facts and truth? Now, this is important. Sometimes in my intro class where I have a module on truth, I'll ask students, what is truth? And a student might say, well, a fact. A fact is truth. Well, let's make this distinction. Facts are things that happen in the world that can be empirically verified. Truth are claims that are made about those facts. So truth or falsity really speaks to the relationship of the claim being made to the fact itself. Let me give you an example. So let's say I'm sitting here in my office and I hear water hitting the ceiling, hitting the roof and my window, and I make the claim to my secretary that it's raining outside. And there's some dispute about that. She disagrees. How would we clear that up? Well, we would go outside and see. And if raindrops are falling from the sky, then we would say my claim that it's raining outside was true, right? If we go outside and find out that the neighbor had his sprinkler turned up too high and it was spraying over onto my building, then we would say my claim that it's raining outside was false. So the fact is that water is hitting the roof and my window. That's a fact. We can figure out what that is, right? We can go outside and see, is it raining or is it the sprinkler, right? So that's a fact that can be empirically verified. It's right. We can go outside and see. Again, truth, we make claims about those facts. And the claims that we make about those facts can be true or false. Again, I say it's raining outside. That's a claim. That claim can be true or false. We go outside and see that water is falling from the sky. We say, well, that was true. What you said was true. We go outside and no water's falling from the sky. It's the neighbor's sprinkler. We would say, well, your claim was false. So again, facts are things that happen in the world. Truth, falsity really refers to the relationship between claims we make and the facts themselves. So I say my truck is gray. Well, that claim is true if in fact my truck is gray. It would be false if my truck wasn't gray, right? Okay, so that's important. And why is it important? Because if you think about it, if we talk about facts as things that happen in the world and they can be empirically verified, typically we're talking about things with material properties, right? Raindrops are material objects. Trucks are material objects. We can prove them because we can see them, taste them, touch them, hear them, right? There's a means of empirical verification. Values aren't like facts. Values aren't physical properties. Good, bad, right, wrong, they're not physical properties. And so how do we verify the truth of those claims, right? So in other words, if we're all standing here in a group and John is standing there with us and we're all having a discussion and suddenly Mary just slaps John, and we all gasp and we say, oh, that was wrong. Okay, where does that wrong come from? If we had a camera on us and it was videoing all that's taking place, and we captured that video and we slowed it down frame by frame and blew it up so that we could see it really clearly, all we would see is Mary slapped John. We wouldn't see in there anywhere. We wouldn't see in the fact that Mary slapped John. We would not see the right or wrong. It's not in there. The wrong is not going to be in the action itself. The wrong, the value is going to be imposed on the fact. As a matter of fact, we would need a little more information to determine. We would need further facts to determine whether what Mary did was wrong or not. So let's say we do a little further investigation, and what we find as we question witnesses and talk to Mary herself is that earlier in the day, Mary found out her boyfriend was cheating on her. She was just standing there thinking about it, got really upset, and just lashed out at the closest guy to her. That was John. Slaps John. John had nothing to do with any of this. Well, we would say that action is wrong. Given the facts, we place this value on that action, that it was wrong. So the value is imposed upon the fact itself. Let me give you the same scenario, but now the facts are a little bit different. With further facts, we find out that while we weren't looking, while we weren't paying attention, John reached over and touched Mary inappropriately. And in response to that, she slapped him. Well, now we probably are going to say something like this: Mary was justified in what she did. She had a right to protect herself. So you have the same fact. The same fact, initial fact, is that Mary slapped John. With further facts, we're going, in one case where Mary's just mad at her boyfriend for cheating on her, we're going to impose this value. What she did was wrong. We'll change the facts a little bit, find out that John touched her inappropriately, and the value changes. We're going to say, well, she was justified in what she did. Okay, so, but now that's all going to, remember, when we talk about facts, these are things that can be empirically verified because they are material properties, right? Things that we can empirically verify and prove. But the good, the bad, the right, the wrong, these are values, and values aren't things that you can prove. Why? What are values? Well, values are what matter to us. These are things that matter to us, right? They're what motivate our behavior. They ground our judgments about what is good or bad, right or wrong, desirable or undesirable. So we could think of various types of values, but in this class, we're concerned with moral values, values that help us determine what the morally right action would be in any particular case, or what would be a morally wrong action in any particular case. Now, let's look at this for a moment. On the left-hand side, you have statements of fact. On the right-hand side, we add a value. Look at this statement of fact. The knife is sharp. That's just a descriptive statement about the knife, right? And we can prove that, right? Because the knife is a material object that we could test, right? We could cut something with it, and we could say the knife is indeed sharp. Look at the statement of value. The knife is a good kitchen tool. Now, again, the good is a value judgment. And in this case, you would have to have some other criteria for measuring it. What would it mean for something to be a good kitchen tool? That's different than measuring the sharpness of the knife. Now you have to determine what the good is that would make the knife a good kitchen tool. That's going to be different, right? So what I'm saying here is that when we talk about values, values are going to require something more than just empirical verification, because you don't have empirical verification when it comes to a value, because the good is not some material thing, right? Like the blade of a knife. Look, Jill is dying painfully. That's just a descriptive fact, right? And we can verify that. We can see that. It's better for Jill to die than suffer. The better tells us that this is a value judgment, right? And how would we prove that better, right? The better is not going to be a material property. So how are we going to judge that? Same thing with Bob lied to Bill. That's just a fact. It's wrong for Bob to lie to Bill. Well, in Bob lying to Bill, right? If we had that on camera, again, you're not going to see the wrong in there anywhere. That value is going to be imposed upon Bob's action. But the wrong is not a material property that we can verify, like raindrops falling from the sky. Look at 4. Jim believes in freedom of speech. Freedom of speech ought to be protected. So you see these words: good in number 1, better in number 2, wrong in number 3, ought in number 4. Those are value terms. And those are evaluated differently because they're not material properties, like the blade of a knife, like raindrops falling from the sky, like the gray in my truck. Okay, so now we're going to work through this far more, but just keep that in mind, right? Just as we think through this, how are we going to prove the truth of a value? I can prove the truth that it's raining outside by going outside and seeing raindrops falling from the sky, but that's because raindrops are material properties. Think of it this way, too. If I made the claim that it's good that it's raining outside and there's some dispute, how are we going to solve that? If we go outside, we may very well see water falling from the sky, but we're not going to see good falling from the sky. And think of it also this way. It raining outside might be good for some farmers who have been experiencing a drought and need it for their crops. Might be bad for others. Someone who's, a group who had an outdoor activity scheduled for that day. So it gets much more complicated when you involve the value. And then some things have instrumental value. Something has instrumental value when it's valued for its own, for the sake of something else, right? Something is said to have instrumental value when it's valued. It's good for the sake of something else. So a sharp kitchen knife has instrumental value. It's good for cutting, right? A knife is good for cutting, so it has an instrumental value. Money is good for purchasing, so it has an instrumental value. So something is said to have an instrumental value when it's good for the sake of something else. But some things might have instrumental value. That's when it's good for its own sake. When something is good for its own sake, it's said to have instrumental value. This is important because if there is something of intrinsic value, right? So something has intrinsic value when it's good for its own sake. I think I might have said that backwards a minute ago. Something has intrinsic value when it's good for its own sake. And if something has intrinsic value, that would be important because then actions that promote that which is of intrinsic value would be morally appropriate actions. Now, Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosopher, Aristotle said that happiness has intrinsic value. Why did he say that? Well, because happiness we seek for its own sake. We seek health, wealth, popularity, all of those things, fame, all of those things we seek for the sake of happiness. We think that it'll make us happy. But if somebody says, why do you want to be healthy? Why do you want to be wealthy? Because that'll make me happy. But if somebody says, why do you want to be happy? That's just it. That's the end. We want happiness. And so for Aristotle, if happiness is of intrinsic value, then that would be a guide to determining the moral worth of an action. Actions that promote happiness would be morally appropriate action. Now, we're going to have to talk about what happiness is, and we'll have a whole lecture on that in Module 2. Okay. So let's end here for this evening because we're just about out of time. And let me explain to you what these elements of ethics mean. The preeminence of reason. The preeminence of reason simply says that the primary way we think through or we determine the moral worth of an action is to reason through it. Reason is the primary means by which we determine the moral worth of an action, not emotions, not conscience, because remember, those things are conditioned, but reason. Right? So we'll talk much more about this, right? And then universal perspective simply says that when we determine a moral principle, it ought to have some universal significance, right? In other words, it doesn't just apply in certain situations to certain people, but when we have a principle that says one ought never to lie, we intend that to be a general principle, a universal principle, that no one anywhere should make a habit of lying for the reasons that we talked about earlier. It should be impartial. That means I shouldn't impose strict moral principles on certain groups and excuse others. And I shouldn't excuse myself, right? So it should be the case that if it's right for me to do it, it's right for everyone to do it. So the principle that one ought not to lie shouldn't be imposed upon a certain group of people and then another group excused from it. And then the dominance of moral norms, right? The whole purpose is to establish moral norms, and those moral norms are intended for the good of society, to help society move toward flourishing. Now, we'll talk about all of that in greater detail as we move forward. Okay. So after this, I have you read Crito and the Phaedo by Plato. I'll talk more about this next Thursday. We'll finish up here next Thursday. So for next Thursday, we're going to finish up. We just have a few slides here, and this will just take about, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes to kind of tell you what Plato's doing in those two writings, the Crito and the Phaedo. And it's basically just going to kind of be a standard of a model for moral decision making. So for Thursday, September 4th, then we're going to continue on in Module 1. We'll spend the first, say, 10 minutes or so wrapping up Lecture 1 there with the Plato, Crito, and Phaedo, and then we'll get into Lecture 2, Critical Thinking and Moral Decision Making. So you don't have any reading from the textbook for Lecture 2, but we do have some reading from the additional reading folder. So do that additional reading in preparation for next Thursday's class. All right, folks, thank you so much. Have a great rest of the evening. Have a great week. We'll meet back here at 6 p.m. on Thursday, September 4th. I'll see you then.
Bye.
Thank you, sir. Bye.
Professor, did you post what we read for the next Thursday and Blackboard or no?
Yeah, it's on the syllabus. Just follow I just took this off the syllabus. So you'll see on the syllabus, this reading right here that I have listed, it's there on the syllabus. So just follow the syllabus when it comes to the reading.
Okay, thank you.
Oh,